Welcome everybody to the new Backbase webinar. Today's topic is next level mobile banking. And maybe before we dive in, let's go to the agenda. Everybody, the slides and the recordings will be shared within 48 hours after the webinar. So everybody will receive both a copy of the presentation as well as of the recording. So you can study that or you can share it with colleagues if you like. Also, if you would like to interact with today's session, you can use the chat question box of your GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar panel. Please raise those questions, and at the end of the session, we'll take around 5 to 10 minutes to go into an active Q&A. And if you'd like to participate on Twitter, please use the hashtag Backbase tag to share your opinion or some insights. Will be very much appreciated. Let's dig in. Tim, I'm here today. My name is Jouk Pleiter, and I'm here today with Tim Rutten. Tim, today's topic is next level mobile banking, and it might be good actually maybe to give that a little bit of perspective. For everybody here on the screen, what you see here is I think very familiar for everybody that is active in the banking and insurance industry. There's a huge change in the channel mix, where 5 years ago, the predominant channel was still the branch. We now see a massive switch to mobile channels. And what you see here on the screen, and I think for a lot of people, this is already totally applicable. You rarely will visit the branch, and the majority of these interactions with the bank is moving to the mobile device context. Yeah. But in the meantime, still there's a branch. There's also still internet banking, and there's still call centers. So the other channels are still alive. And I think that's also going to be a larger part of today. How do we make sure that customers will interact seamlessly across those different channels? Okay. Good. The next one, another piece of context, I think also for this webinar, it's all about customer engagement. So within the context of mobile, but also in the context of banking, non-banking institutions like Amazon, like Uber, like Netflix, like Instagram, they are raising the bar. From a customer experience and a customer engagement point of view. So it's also very important that nowadays end customers are not per se only comparing us with another bank, but they're also really comparing us with these mainstream digital properties and the ease of use and the convenience and the instant effect these applications provide to their end users. And as a result, I guess, today's challenge is also to really fight and conquer in that battle for customer engagement and moving that to the next level. So summarize it, I think those are the two major points for today. How can we act as banks on the change in the channel mix? And secondly, how can we actively participate in this battlefield to optimize the customer engagement? So maybe we can dive in, Tim. If we look at the first trend, the omni-channel delivery model, that's what we see here on the screen. It's kind of Netflix, and I guess the nice thing about Netflix, you can watch it on any device. Correct. Yeah. On any screen. Yep. And I guess the key question is, how are we going to do that in banking? Yeah, in a banking context. Right. So maybe you can tell a little bit about the next slide. Yeah.
So I think this resonates well with the whole audience. I imagine if you're indeed active in this space. If you look at where we're coming from, let's say 10, 20, maybe even more years ago. To the left of the slide, you see that we initially found that we had a single channel to interact with the customer. That obviously was originally the branch, right? That's basically how I was raised up as well, as a millennial even. From there onwards, we saw the newer multi-channel mix, which means that, well, the customer can still go through the branch. But still, if you look at the experience, there's multiple silos underlying that experience, whether that's in the branch or perhaps internet banking already. Meaning it's still a very scattered landscape. You still have different look and feels. It's not a very seamless experience, I would argue. In the old days.
What do you think about? I mean, we have all these kind of hype terminologies like multi-channel, cross-channel, omni-channel. Should we really care?
Yeah, I think we should.
Why?
Yeah. It's of course from the industry to put a new hype title on any type of topic. But if you look at these particular definitions, they're very important to understand what they mean. Mm-hmm. So going from single channel to multi-channel, which sure, you're serving the customer on multiple channels, fair enough. That's let's say the MVP of the newer reality, I would say. Yeah. But in the long term, you want to go, well, apparently we had to go first cross-channel because we're going to go fast enough. And in the end stage, you want to go omni-channel.
But then if I look also here at the stuff we're highlighting, what is unique about omni-channel? Is it kind of that consistent experience, or is it kind of what are the key ingredients that you're aiming for with Omni-Channel, and why is that important either to an end customer or to a bank?
Yeah. Well, you just introduced slides talking about Amazon, Netflix, Uber, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great experience, right? It's solid across the board, regardless of the device, regardless of where you are. It's really servicing you as an end customer, and that's how these companies are built. They're built customer first.
Yeah.
And in the omni-channel world, omni-channel is, of course, it's a definition, and there's a lot of buzz around it, if you will. But the reality is, we want to see the exact same experience with banking.
All right, so then it's more, interesting point. I think probably Amazon or Netflix wouldn't even talk about channels. They don't care.
No, they don't care.
It's just a customer first, a touch point, and regardless of the touch point, large screen, small screen, doesn't matter. It will be a seamless customer experience. Yeah. That's awesome. So maybe then to kind of summarize this part, I think it's kind of indeed customer first. The customer has holistic brand experience, and also for the bank actually to do this, you probably also need to have a really unified and holistic view on who is the customer and how can we interact with that customer. So that kind of maybe drives us kind of to the next picture, which is a little bit about, okay, if we think about this, it should be customer first, and that basically it runs on any device, and it should kind of be able then probably also to do a kind of a seamless handoff between different devices. Yeah. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit, Tim. How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, this is implicit with Omni-Channel. This is implicit with having a seamless experience across the board. The most obvious example we always see in the boardrooms is, hey, I use Netflix, regardless of where I am, I can pick up the show that I've been watching. Yeah. And that counts for all these types of new consumer-focused applications, I would say. For banking, it means exactly the same. And I think there's a massive opportunity to service the customer better. And that's also what you see here on the slide. Regardless of the device, you flow through a journey, and the channels are just underlying or implicit, and they support that journey.
Right. Do you also then see front office employees inside the bank participating in this journey? Can it also, next to be self-assisted, can it also still be human-assisted? That a CSR or an advisor can still participate in this flow?
Of course, assisted and empowered, I would say. So also on their end, they should have a better experience of servicing the customers.
Right.
So again, bringing that all together, it ties into it, yes.
All right, cool. But it sounds like a big endeavor, especially if you think about the current landscape.
Yeah.
So maybe what we see here is kind of, okay, how can we actually then move into this kind of future where we have seamless omni-channel customer journeys? And some of you may be familiar with this picture and you've seen it before, but what this tries to illustrate is that also the notion is that a customer probably will, in a journey of, let's say, a loan origination or applying for a specific loan, there might be multiple touch points, right? And it's kind of then also, I guess, one, we need to do a handoff between those devices so people can start on one device and go to another device. But it might also be interesting to see what type of task do we optimize for within a particular device context. Is that something that you would take into consideration?
Yeah, this is very important and directly ties into the onboarding and origination challenge, or digital sales, if you will. For instance, if we look at the slide here, you find that this is about a loan application, right? Let's imagine a mortgage. Yeah. It's a massive financial decision in your life. Yeah. And in this case, what the table clearly illustrates is that you have several steps in this journey, right? You check the rates. Yeah, click that window.
Let's go there. Sorry.
You of course check the rates, and it's likely that you do this on a smartphone. From there onwards, especially with a mortgage, it might be your tablet or desktop environment, or you actually start looking for more details and potentially even do the first step of applying for a mortgage. If you go through the whole cycle, there might even be some human touch points. But then again, you want these touch points to be preferably seamless. And mortgage
and equipped with the same data, I guess. You don't want to provide the same stuff over and over, right?
No, exactly. And that's where it usually goes wrong, especially with the more complex products.
I quite often I meet people say, forget about the other channels. Everything needs to be mobile. Everything needs to run on my smartphone, and that's the only thing. And given the fact that this webinar is about the next level of mobile banking, what kind of are the thought processes here? What is there to say? To say, okay, let's just do everything in a smartphone.
It's an argument to make. It is. Assuming that you have, I mean, if you draw to a bigger picture, then mobile is just a screen which we can interact with. Yeah. It's just a smaller screen, and it has a few extra capabilities like OCR scanning or facial recognition, which will actually empower the journeys better.
So I guess the mobile phone is going to be is a primary citizen in all these kind of different journeys.
Sure,
and it's extremely nice utility, but still you have the larger screen, to upload documents, or some people actually prefer a larger screen.
It's debatable. I think if you look at the newer challenger banks, usually mobile first,
Yeah.
super modern,
Yeah.
and they typically start with simple products,
Yeah.
right? Just retail banking or a credit card type of product mix that they have.
Yeah.
Let's see if you can also go into more, let's say, complex products.
Towards the audience, we would challenge them to say, yeah, let's really try to use the smartphone as the primary sit-in and customer interaction.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, make sure that within that investment, you can also still reuse the same capabilities on larger screens to empower that same end user in case, or to empower an employee as part of that overall journey.
Yeah.
Right. Clear.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we can move forward. And also kind of maybe show a few demos.
Sure.
So there we go. I guess that it's all nice, but in most of the banks, the reality, of course, is kind of this whole siloed landscape. So it's kind of interesting to figure out how that is going to play out. What are the major objectives we see regarding moving into kind of that consistent experience? Is it just the silos, or is there more? Is it also organizational?
Yeah, it's both. So there's a few more, let's say, technical objectives that you might have. One of those obvious ones is making sure that you de-silo your organization, so you consolidate your underlying backend stack, if you will. That's more on the technical piece. From there onwards, of course, it's also about truly becoming digital. And that's not just having the idea, but also the manpower to actually execute this properly.
Right, but that's kind of then the mindset that to kind of say a financial institution in the end of the day will become a tech company. So we need to own that tech DNA, that digital DNA, building those agile teams to really master this.
Yeah.
And you cannot just simply outsource that. It's really a core competence for the institution.
It depends really on the bank and where they play. But
all right.
Yeah, they have to at least get into the digital mindset, and that's not what the bank is usually equipped for. Yeah.
All right, fine. So what we see here is kind of basically the transition is that how do we actually then move from these channel islands and how do we move into kind of omni-channel? So I guess what we see here on the screen to the audience, which is quite important, what you see is kind of in many banks we see kind of this kind of isolated landscape where not only in the back end we have different systems, but also in the digital front end, even in what we call channel or the touch points for the customer. Unfortunately, there are these kind of huge brick walls that kind of separate these different touch points from each other. So although we can have a very nice smartphone application, if it's not properly connected to an internet application or it's not properly connected to someone in the call center, the experience is still expensive and broken. So I think probably you have a couple of problems here. One, it is extremely expensive and probably not sustainable in the future to maintain all these different channels with separate code bases. Mm-hmm. So you've got a whole digital team for mobile with a beautiful app, but it's completely siloed. You've got another online banking experience, another silo, and then you go into, let's say, the more classic traditional channel. Mm-hmm. And basically all the logic to interact with the customer is duplicated, you triple, you quadruple, basically the same process. So how can we make sure that actually we move it from these islands into a single platform that will kind of orchestrate these customer interactions, A, across multiple devices, but B, probably even more important, between all the different stakeholders. And that basically means both the end customer, their family members, but also front office employees that actually assist the end customer in whatever they do, right? So that we kind of move here from this kind of almost what you see from the past, almost every decade we had a new technology, and these technologies kind of were introduced into the bank as yet another channel, another distribution lane towards the customer. But it was a very much, I would say, push-oriented perspective, yet another channel to push stuff and products to the customer. And I guess if we move to this Facebook or Netflix or Amazon type of model, it's probably going to be more of a pull model where the customer's in control, it's customer first, they pick and choose the right time, the right moment, the right device context, and from there we can engage with them. But then we need to kind of have this green box here that is kind of the orchestrator, the director that can actually, or almost like the concierge service that can actually will receive the customer and kind of understand what they're looking for and help them and guide them through the process across any device and assisted by multiple people if need be.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add?
I think here basically this is what most of the banks are currently working on, going from channel islands to omni-channel. It's not you cannot ignore it anymore, especially if you want to become properly customer facing. given the fact that the subject today is mostly mobile, you see that a lot of banks, they basically have two decisions. You either go for a truly omni-channel ambition and you indeed introduce an omni-channel layer in between, or you just want to have a quick fix. And that's, again, let's say the old play where you just play with, I want to have mobile today. I'm not too interested about any of the innovations or anything else. I'm just going to plug that in and we'll look into the future later. Yeah. I think within our context, within Backbase context, we usually see the ones with proper digital ambition move to the whole omni-channel picture.
That's also interesting because what we also see more and more, if your initial focus, you never will do a big omni-channel project in, probably this is a multi-year perspective and you're not going to renovate the whole thing within a year. So therefore, if your initial major pain point is the mobile app or an origination or onboarding process or whatever, there's already a budget allocated to do this. And actually, I think as a financial institution, you have the choice to see, am I going to make that investment in yet another island, yet another channel island, or do I can already allocate that kind of and achieve the goal, the short-term goal, that I already do it within kind of an omni-channel architecture and an omni-channel blueprint. And of course, the second part will have more longevity into the future because from one single solution, you can then scale and add additional capabilities, and eventually you will arrive at that kind of overall omni-channel vision.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense, definitely.
Cool. All right. So I guess what we basically then agree on is that what we need to do in the future is here, if we look about next level mobile banking, is we have way too many silos in the back end, in the front end. And I guess the key thing is that how do we move away from those silos and how do we unify these silos in a customer experience layer? And I guess, again, this is not something you do overnight. This is more like a dot on the horizon. This is a transition phase where step by step in this, if we look at this big blue bar, you're not going to do it at once. You will just pick your pain point and you're going to solve the pain point, but you're going to do it already within your omni-channel perspective. So I guess the vision is towards the end customer. It's customer first, a superior experience. It's going to be personal and relevant. It's going to be easy and frictionless, and it has to be available anytime, any place. Within this architectural picture, of course, at the same time, in order to assist the customer, we also, of course, have to do the backend integration. And we can do this piecemeal, based on priorities, based on pain points, based on cost level, based on customer satisfaction, based on revenue goals. We can pick the use case that has the biggest ROI or the biggest business impact or customer impact. And from there, we can basically start to roadmap and execute.
So given the topic of today being mobile, is that what you would envision as the best channel to go for? Because of reasons? Is there anything?
It really depends. When we interact with banks, and I really can say when we interact with banks, literally on any continent of this planet, you see, of course, there's a lot of new mobile initiatives, but you also see a lot of pain points around onboarding and streamlining new customer onboarding and product origination. So that's a space where there's a lot of activity. Mm-hmm. And in a few other cases, I would say maybe 10–20% of the cases, there's pain points internally. You see a wide variety of legacy applications in the call center and in the branch, and it's a very expensive, very cumbersome operation. So basically what we see pain points everywhere. I think the good news is that you can really start to focus on that initial pain point. But what you do is that you analyze the pain point and you analyze how you can get a very good solution for it to immediately resolve that short-term goal and accomplish that goal. But at the same time, you have a fundamental choice that do you continue to create yet another silo or yet another isolated code base, or do you already start to do it with an omni-channel end state in mind? And of course, an omni-channel platform and an omni-channel architecture, as we will discuss, might help you to accelerate. But even without a platform that can help you, it's already a very important state of mind and an architectural perspective to try to move away from a one-off siloed perspective into something that is more generic and reusable. Yeah. What is very good, and we can now testify that we have been on this journey with a lot of banks, and we started these journeys already 5 years ago, and we now see so many banks that can really testify that the actual reuse, you create a capability, let's say a loan origination, you create it once and you do it properly for a particular device context or a particular loan product or a particular user, either end customer or employee. You do it well. From there, with very little additional impact, you can start to reuse. But you do it from a single hub, a single director, a single orchestrator that actually, so you don't have to do everything, you don't have to duplicate everything. And from there you can grow. So that idea of creating reusable end-to-end capabilities that you can really repurpose in an omni-channel and omni-user context, I think that's critical.
Got it.
Yeah. Great, cool. All right, so I guess then the end goal, and what you see here is, of course, a picture that is very close to the Backbase platform. But in general, I think forget about Backbase, forget about our technology. What is really required in the future is to go for, in the end state, one platform that can interact with any stakeholder on any touch point. So what you see at the top, of course, you see the different user context or the touch points, and then you basically see kind of a number of layers. And in these layers, you have engines. For instance, in all these customer interactions, you need content. Where is the universal API so I can access content whenever I need it? Could be marketing content, could be a frequently asked question type of content, a video tutorial, a legal document, but a universal way, whenever we need content, how do we kind of inject the right content in the right journey at the right moment? You probably need business rules. You need security rules. You need integration rules. You need to kind of connect to various backend systems. You need KYC. You need AML. You have all these different requirements. In a future vision of moving into this kind of omni-channel picture, it is very important to have a nicely curated set of capabilities that your development teams, whenever they kind of create this end-to-end capability, they can standardize on. If you don't do that, they will reinvent the wheel. And that's what we see with a lot of these large banks and also with mid-sized banks. People start to attack a problem in a very siloed, very kind of, limited way. And you see a massive amount of teams. They try to be agile, and even they succeed to be agile, they still have their own micro perspective, and they basically reinvent the wheel.
But in relation to this picture, does this type of architecture, this type of approach, does that help in any way there?
Of course, it helps in a massive way if you kind of move into, and of course you don't have to take all the layers. Of course, you don't have to do this with Backbase. What is very important that you have to have an overall omni-channel architecture perspective. How do you do security? How do you do content management? How do you do integration? How do you do multi-factor authentication? How do you persist transaction data? How do you do dynamic case management? So I think for banks to really be agile and to become an Amazon or to become a Netflix, you need to have a technology stack that is structured, modular, piecemeal, so you can pick and choose whatever you need. And you have development best practices for your front end, web, mobile, for integration, for security, for capabilities. And the more you do that on the same architecture, and the more you have overall supervision, the more synergy you will have, the less reinventing the wheel you will have, the more reuse you will have.
Would you then argue that the effective reuse of true omni-channel is more of an organizational, let's say, challenge, or more of a technical challenge?
There's definitely a larger organizational component to it. I think the technologies are there, but it requires kind of architectural supervision. It needs coaching. It needs organization to a larger degree. So the technology is a critical enabler, but just the technology standalone also probably won't give you the immediate result. It, of course, like everything in life, it needs proper stewardship to kind of reap the benefits. Yeah, for sure. All right, so I guess then to summarize this, and also time-wise, I think the end day is that with a platform like this, and how you kind of create a platform vision like this, you try to move away from logic that is kind of optimized per channel. So you have screens and workflows and content and business logic all optimized for mobile, and you do the same thing for internet, and you've done it in the past for the branch and for the call center. You basically move into this vision where you say, let's say I'm going to start with mobile, and I leave my internet and my branch applications as is, but once I solve this in a generic way for mobile, with very little effort extra, I can now also reutilize that in internet and in the branch. So the point is not, we basically don't believe in omni-channel like, okay, let's do it in a big bang. We basically believe more, let's pick a channel, let's pick a pain point, and do that with a proper omni-channel architecture. And from there, you scale up and you have your reuse.
Interesting.
Yep. All right, so I think net, and then we can move on and maybe go to some of the demos. I think the end vision here, it's all about how do we accelerate your digital innovation. I think most of the banks have plenty of existing systems, and the change capabilities of these backend systems are rather limited. So I think the future here is with an omni-channel architecture, and again, regardless of how you do it, the sole purpose here is, I think, to kind of, it has to sit on top of your core systems. You cannot replace them. So as you can also see here in the diamond, security and application integration are critical components to make sure that you can actually continue to use your systems and they can continue to operate at a lower innovation heartbeat. But then with these new digital architecture components, these omni-channel components in place, how can you work with Agile, with a proper orchestration process and with a proper architecture to accelerate your digital innovation? And with the single, we call this, in the end of the day, forget about all the channels. I think it's a bad word. It's about customer first technology. How can we apply customer first technology and create those seamless journeys and actually enable the institution to go faster? Okay. All right, so that's kind of the next topic for today, and Tim is going to show us a little demo, but I think that the next topic is really, okay, how are we going to do that? Eh? Because customers are basically expecting these instant, seamless customer journeys. They expect mobile applications that are equally as good as a Netflix, an Uber, or an Instagram. So from a financial institution, how would something like that look like? And there's many interpretations. And then secondly, more importantly, how are we going to pull that off?
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
All right, so the first demo we would like to share with you today is what we call our 60 seconds onboarding demo. And effectively what we show you there is that across multiple channels we can complete a full onboarding flow. So what you're looking at right now is a so-called retail banking implementation of the Backbase platform. Right now I'm looking at the public marketing website, and as you can tell in the centerpiece of the screen, I can potentially become a customer in less than 60 seconds. Now, of course, we're exaggerating a little bit just to make a point. But for today, we'd like to take you through a journey of what it would potentially mean if you work with a true omni-channel platform to accomplish seamless onboarding. If I click on Start Now, we basically access a so-called conversational style dialogue in a very simple UI pattern. We're able to accomplish this because of the flexible architecture, because we're using modern day technologies, and because we have a very open, let's say, architectural principle to be able to put in the right assets to make it a great journey. In this case, I'm first going to fill out my name, which is Tim Rutten. In the next step, I fill out my social security number. For instance, in a real implementation, this is automatically validated with a third-party API. Could be any type of data field we validate, of course. I fill out my email address. Feel free to reach out, obviously. Again, will be validated. And as a next step, I need to define my password. So effectively, right now, I've created a so-called prospect account. I didn't go through all the checks. I didn't do the anti-money laundering check, KYC, and so forth, but at least I have a user account with the bank. Now, as a next step, we need to fully upload all of our relevant documentation. Think passport, think driver's license, and so forth. And this is where usually the friction starts. And that's what we typically see in the market. How do we have this seamless type of process while still adhering to, basically the complexity of becoming a banking customer? I think you have regulatory issues you need to comply to. Now, in this case, we feel that, all the technology is there and all the flexibility should there to drive really seamless customer journeys. And in this case, what we're showing you here is that we're not going to complete the flow on desktop to provide my ID card, but I'm going to continue on phone. So what you see on the screen right now is that we generate a so-called QR code as one of the existing patterns to basically take the next step on a mobile device. And as a matter of fact, I have my mobile device here on the screen. I'm going to wait a little bit because of the lag on the line, obviously. But what we're currently looking at is a Backbase mobile banking application. And obviously, this could be any type of bank using it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to continue registration. And in doing so, it opens on my camera. So right now, you basically see my laptop. I swap to the previous screen, I put this onto the QR code, and from there onwards, it goes to the next step. It goes a bit fast, obviously, it will never show up on the webinar, but basically you pick up the parameters from the QR code and continue the journey on my mobile device. On my mobile device, I now get asked to scan my driver's license or a state ID. In reality, in this pretty fast-moving world with fintechs and so forth, there's many providers out there that allow us to do object recognition, for instance, do facial scanning, and so forth. In this case, we chose for a very simple example, scanning my driver's license. So here on the table, I have my driver's license. I need to align it properly. There we are. Basically, we're taking the physical information into the digital world, and in this case, we now validate all of my information, and I confirm. Now, as the next step, and this is something we consistently see also in the more modern applications in other spaces, there's facial recognition technology, or any other type of technology that basically allows me to confirm that I'm a living and breathing person. So in this case, I'm going to take a selfie. I'll do it slowly so you at least get me a little bit. Hey, everyone. And basically now recognize against my driver's license that it is indeed me, even including a little beard that I happen to grow the past 10 years. We now go through terms and conditions. We accept those. And as a final step, we sign off digitally. If you look at this process so far, you will definitely feel that these steps are the regular steps you go through when becoming a banking customer, either in the branch or over the phone, or maybe even while sending paperwork towards the bank through snail mail. If I now type, I'm ready, we provision a banking account. And in this case, it's a demo. So we preload it with a few options. And from there onwards, you could imagine setting up your mobile banking application, for instance, with Touch ID, which would be a regular journey I would usually go through. And once I've done so, there you are. I can log out, and that's basically a typical flow we would have to go from a desktop environment and onboard for a new product to go into finalizing it on your mobile device and then doing your first login, which effectively takes you through a provisioning step. What you find from there, let's give a quick example. We can log in as a typical user. I'm going a bit faster here. And if I do so, I can set my soft token codes, which again is a typical registration flow. We're then completed with the full setup of my mobile banking application. And as a final step, we can go to our accounts, and there we see and have access to all of my banking accounts, even my small business banking accounts, as well as a savings account and a MasterCard.
So Tim, at the same time, you've done, this is awesome. So when you're done now, right? You basically onboarded in a phenomenal short time frame. Yep. This application is now also available in the web as internet banking. Same stuff. Correct. Yes. So it's there. Yep. And if I'm a CSR and I'm an advisor in the branch, I can go to the same application as well. Yes. So I can also act on behalf of you, and I can see your behavior, and I can activate your account, deactivate, support you, etc. Yep. So that's all with the same platform, right? Correct. Yes. Clear. All right. Good. I hope this was useful for the audience to see. This is just well, it's not one journey, but I think it's a very important customer journey. It's the onboarding journey, and it's kind of how do you make sure that we make that completely seamless, no friction, no branch, no paper, no human assist. The customer can do this completely on their own in, I would say, less than 2 minutes. Yep. 60 seconds is maybe a little bit ambitious if you're really in a hurry, but you can do this in minutes instead of days, right? And you can do this without paper. But I think most importantly, the way this is created is not just a one-off mobile app. It is done with an omni-channel architecture in the background and with an omni-channel end-state perspective. So this investment is not just an investment in a mobile app. This is an investment in a customer journey that can now run on any device. Yep. And that is also available to support multiple actors, the end customer, as well as your employees within the bank. Yep. And I think that's really pretty powerful, and I think that's kind of the vision here. If we talk about next level mobile banking, of course, it's about utilizing these mobile capabilities, the camera, the OCR, all the cool stuff, and the time to market you can do with these type of applications. That's really important. But if we would do it as a one-off, it would basically lack a lot of kind of scalability potential for the future. Yeah. Shall we go back to let's do it. Topic? Yeah. Okay. There we go. Awesome. So I guess what you see here now, the key question is, how do you make an application like this, Tim? How does that work, and what are the key ingredients? So I think that what you see here on the slide is probably going to be a little summary, but if we do customer first technology and customer first applications, they need to be instant. You've got the end user, you've got the smartphone, the customer wants something, and just like with Uber, I push one button and the car will arrive within a certain amount of time. It's just a simple app, but the Uber app is basically controlling this huge ecosystem of payments, getting the car, getting the right map navigation technology. It's combining all these different technologies into a single customer experience, and it's basically simplifying all that complexity in the back end into a single button, and off you go. Yep. Right? Yep. So I guess the journey starts with the user. It has to be instant, and it has to be there in the moment, anytime, any place. Yep. So I guess that kind of then brings us to the next slide, and we already discussed it, but if we need to do kind of that Uber-like experience, that single push of a button type of experience, hiding that complexity, how can we streamline these omni-channel customer journeys, and how can we do it in such a way that a single end-to-end capability will be available on any touch point for any user? I think one of the nicer disciplines that we now see emerging is kind of this notion of service design.
Yeah.
And service design, I guess, is all about designing for these moments of truth. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit on that, Tim. What do you see in this space?
Yeah. Well, to be frank, if you look at the demo that I just illustrated, it was extremely simple. Yeah. Although the complexity behind it can be quite serious. The approach we took here was very service design focused, meaning what's the job that needs to be done by the customer.
Yeah.
And in this case, the job that needs to be done is I want to basically onboard ASAP with little friction, if any.
Yeah.
Friction points are, for instance, my driver's license, my passport, my personal ID that can be validated with government documentation, the financial checks, and so forth. So a moment of truth is
getting a signature.
Getting the signature in. Yeah.
You know, we can make this very difficult.
Exactly, and those are the moments of truth where you typically find yourself, for instance, in an e-commerce setting, to think, well, you know what, I'll buy it somewhere else. I'm done. I don't want to go through this process because I don't have the time. I don't believe this is a trusted player or anything else.
Yeah. It's too difficult, right?
Way too difficult. So if you then look at this particular slide talking about service design, these moments of truth are usually where is the friction and how can we simplify that? How can we make it in such a way that customers will actually be delighted and think in the onboarding journey, wow, I wish more providers would approach it like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's exactly what we're seeing in the market, and it's also exactly what we, at least within Backbase, use to think about these types of concepts. Meaning, we really go again customer first. We identify what really needs to happen. We then start designing the engagements, and from there onwards, if we've validated actually that these ideas work and that they're simple and actually valuable to go for, that's when they go into engineering. That also ties back into the typical organizational challenge you will find in trying to nail this. You want to become very fast and agile in prototyping. Just generating a new idea, getting a new prototype out, validating with real people, real customers, and be very honest about, well, that doesn't work, it doesn't fly.
But those are the keywords, right? Like job to be done. What's the job to be done? And be brutal about it and how to simplify that. And then probably prototyping, starting small. It's also what it says here, start small, minimum viable product. And maybe also kind of work with all these different stakeholders in the bank, not about not possible, but how do we make it possible, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's to the final point of this slide, the analyze piece. It sounds very boring and cumbersome, but that's where really the real added value is created. Because the beginning of the cycle and the design part and engineering it, that's all fair, and I think you, as an organization, can shift quite fast to start delivering that type of capability. But then having a real analysis with real data points based on real users and actually adopting that properly, that's where usually the magic happens.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's kind of interesting. So I guess we discussed it quite a few times already. We're talking about customer first technology, but maybe if we compare it with the traditional, the classic approach, I think the classic approach was very much inside out, right?
Correct. Yeah.
It's totally different mindset. So to a degree, everything you just said has to do with what is your paradigm, what's your worldview, what is your approach, and maybe to simplify the world a little bit, there are two major approaches. One is more the classic approach. The classic approach starts with your backend system. It starts with your products, and it basically thinks, how can we get this product to the customer, and how do we push it? But basically, it's not about, it doesn't start with the customer, it starts basically with the bank or the limitations of the bank or the products the banks want to sell, and let's call that classic. Yeah. So the new mindset moving forward, I guess, is more about customer first. So customer first is all about customer centric, focusing on these moments of truth, thinking about the job needs to be done by the end customer, and we typically in the past also have been summarizing this as the outside in approach. And maybe what is interesting to think about, what are the key technologies you pretty much require for customer first technology? I think if we really simplify it, it is about three major ingredients. It's about user experience technology, so the UI and the UX and the customer journey flow. It's the data that you have to exchange between the customer and the backend systems, for the backend system to accept the loan or to do the KYC or to get these documents. And of course, the APIs that will actually enable us to connect to legacy systems. What you also see here is kind of in the importancy level is that you see that we kind of reduce the size of the legacy systems a little bit to kind of emphasize how important it is, to keep those legacy systems, but also to truly start to expose them via APIs so you can communicate with them. for any customer dialogue, any job that needs to be done on any touch point. So an investment in a proper web services layer or a middleware layer or an API layer. And you can do this step by step, but I think most of the technologists within the banking industry are totally convinced of you need to kind of get that kind of API layer in place because it is the enabler of those kind of customer first. So net, I guess the future here, if we have to classify stuff as customer first technology, is a combination of UX, data, and APIs. And with those ingredients, you basically can kind of compose those seamless customer journeys. This picture is kind of summarizing it a little bit more visually in a kind of a layered stacked approach. And maybe it's good to start at the top. What you see at the top is basically, and we will discuss this a little bit more, but you need to have a UI system. We see UI systems or design systems, like maybe you can elaborate, but we see this with Uber, we see this with Airbnb, we see it with Google.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, so how does that work? They kind of industrialize the UI?
Yeah, they've been very smart about it. So if you go back one slide, you see that on the customer first part, there's this whole UX, let's say, capability you need to have within the bank.
Mm-hmm.
What you usually find there, and we've seen this in the market as well, it's all about alignment and having a proper process in place to innovate also on the design track, if you will. And once you start doing this, you will find that it's very easy to become inconsistent. And it's very easy to start floating off in a direction that's not even aligned with what the business wants or what the technology peers can implement. So what do we see there? We see that design systems, or effectively the holy Bibles in which all of the design components, the design metaphors, the design guidelines are fully described and properly implemented. That's the starting point of proper UX. If you then look at the bigger players that are already adopting this, then indeed Airbnb is a good example. Uber is a good example. Salesforce is also having a strong design system philosophy, and it's exactly one of the ingredients that we also bring to the table, and it's very, very important to accelerate on that part of the business as well. If you then move further into this picture, you find again these services layers that Jouk just introduced. That's from a Backbase perspective, or at least how we look at the world. In reality, it's all about being able to decouple from the underlying systems that you already have within the bank. We do this through decoupling the customer experience services, decoupling digital banking services, but also decoupling workflow and dynamic case management related services. And we wrap this all nicely together and make it available in any type of deployment flavor, be it classic, be it cloud. Effectively, if you implement this whole picture properly, you have the right ingredients to be successful in a new world.
So, but that's also, if I go out cooking and I like to make a really nice meal, it kind of helps if I've got the right ingredients in the refrigerator, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what this picture is. And please, for everybody in the audience, you can do this, of course, with Backbase, but you can also do this potentially without Backbase. I think what we're trying to convey here is that if you want to cook a nice meal, make sure you've got the right ingredients in place. So if we analyze, what are those key ingredients, right? Mm-hmm. One, I guess what you just described is the design system. That's kind of that visual language, which you can actually make sure that the experience is consistent. So your front-end engineers are not reinventing the wheel with multiple date pickers and buttons and whatever. It's like developer consistency, but it's also user experience consistency to the end user. And you basically can use this to do prototyping, right? You can use these building blocks partly in prototyping, but then also you can move from prototype into a live production environment. How does it work?
Correct. Well, what you effectively see with these types of design systems is that you follow the philosophy of moving from atoms to molecules to organisms, meaning you have a strong hierarchy of reuse from, for instance, multiple atoms together could be a molecule, multiple molecules would be a real organism. If the philosophy is properly implemented within the different teams that are acting on this system, then you will find that they strongly start reusing, and they strongly start looking into what do we already have and how can we reuse that in, let's say, a new initiative we're driving for a new channel, for instance. If you then look at the implication between developers and designers, it's literally the glue between those two worlds. They start to understand their languages.
Finally, Finally.
It's super hard, yeah.
There's a huge gap between the experience designers and the engineers, or between the prototype, and then you've got the whole prototype going, and then you have to go into actual production code. So,
and then the developer will say, wow, that's not optimal, and so forth.
Yeah. The second ingredient for kind of creating this nice meal is kind of we need to have those capabilities. So what do we need to have from I need content, I need targeting, I need notification, I need alerts, I need to send a message, I need to do a security check, I need to do multi-step factor authentication and do a step up, I need to do a credit check, I need to do anything, those type of things. You can actually eventually formalize them. And the more you formalize them, that also means that you have reuse, because every time in the future you kind of come into a similar use case, you're not going to force your development team to yet reinvent another wheel, but basically think about, okay, there's a generic capability, there's a generic procedure, we have those building blocks in place. And the first thing is, what is the job to be done? What components do we already have at any layer? What is available in our design system? How can we quickly prototype? How can we do the front end? But also in the middleware logic layers, in these decoupled layers, what ingredients do we already have? A KYC check, a background check, whatever. You can do it generically, and then you can repurpose or you can extend them into a particular use case, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So maybe to kind of summarize this topic, and then we're going to wrap it up with the final part, is that the net takeaway is that Tim showed us kind of a very nice onboarding demo, the 60-second onboarding, and that demo is available, or that capability, it's not a demo, that capability is available both in a smartphone, in the web, for the end customer, for the employee, and it's running from a single omni-channel platform. And it is truly the central hub that basically creates this end-to-end capability, and it is completely device agnostic. It runs everywhere, and it's also persona end user agnostic. Of course, it will connect with your core. Of course, it will connect with your CRM, but it basically orchestrates all these digital touch points. And also there's one of the questions here in the audience, you know, are the people in the call center, are they using the same capabilities? The answer is yes, roughly they are using the same capabilities. Maybe you want to optimize it a little bit for the call center employee. Maybe you would like to empower them to do a little bit more, but that's basically a business rule where you say, if the call center employee or the advisor is acting on behalf of the customer, this is the restriction level, these are the security rules, and these are the compliancy rules in which they can operate. But the capability and the platform orchestrating it is one and the same platform and one and the same capabilities in the same end-to-end kind of process. So I think that's kind of hopefully a nice wrap up, and that kind of also moves forward. The vision here is to really let's stop creating siloed applications. We see banks investing multi-million-dollar investments in yet another silo. We've seen it with the ATM technology. We've seen it with the internet technology. And now with mobile, people are repeating that same pattern. The reason is very obvious why they do it, because they want to get quick results. And I think we fully agree with the fact that you need to have quick results, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Everybody, you need to solve the business problem, and it needs to go fast, and the business wants to go fast, and you want to be an innovative leader. And I think the news today is you can go fast, you can solve your problem, but let's do it within an omni-channel blueprint, because then you will have a very nice surprise at the end. You didn't create a one-off monolith again, but you created something generic that can actually scale and that can be reused into the future. And literally, we have so many customers that actually can contest that this is really not only a presentation and a nice story here in a webinar, but it is the reality with a lot of banks that we are able to work with. Final topic, contextual engagement. This part is about how can we make these customer interactions also slightly more intelligent. And I think we're all aware about the artificial intelligence hype, and it's partly hype. I think it's also partly reality. But maybe we can spend maybe 5 minutes on a quick demo.
Sure.
Show you that, okay, we have this omni-channel vision in place. We have this generic reuse across any touch point. How can we make those interactions, how can we empower them with artificial intelligence to also make them a little bit more fully automated intelligent?
Yeah, so currently you're looking at all as well, my mobile device. Indeed you are.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do here, I'm going to log in with Touch ID, and from there onwards we have access to my financial life. Now what you see here is that I have two banking accounts, one for my day-to-day and a second one for my savings goal. In this case, one of my savings goals is to basically buy a very expensive designer bike. Now, in the topic of engagement banking, or let's say AI-driven banking, there will always be the baseline type of activity the customer goes through. Now, in this case, I've been saving for this bike, and actually today I just went out to buy it, meaning I deduct an amount from the amount that you see here on the screen because I went to a bike shop and I basically acquired the bike through my card. What you will find in the Backbase philosophy is that this whole engagement of the customer across all of the different channels comes back to a so-called personal assistant. And one example you see here on the top popping up is basically an automated push notification where a personal assistant is going to literally assist me in making financially sound decisions. In reality, this would be driven by typical AI technology that made useful becomes true personal assistant to the customer. In this case, it basically sees that indeed I bought a bike for 2,000 euros. And the question here is it helpful to look at insurance? Well, yes, it is. Given that answer, I'm going to be able to, basically I need to go through a wizard to define the right product. In this case, it's an electrical bike. I'd like to insure it until 75%.
So the wizard here is running inside the chat app, right?
Correct.
So I don't have to go to a separate web application or a separate, I can stay within the chatbot and it basically shows me a wizard and form elements to directly interact.
Yeah. So again, this is a generic capability. In this case, it's a mobile context.
Yeah.
Also available on a desktop environment or a tablet.
Same dialogue, but here optimized for the smartphone.
Yeah, different UX.
Yeah.
So in this case, I get a few options. Again, smart options, meaning it's taken into account my my customer details, and I now simply authorize through my iPrint. So having done that, we are now fully set up with an insurance product. I think this is a very classical example of an upsell, a little bit of AI in there that at least makes the trigger based on events coming from activities that are triggered in the back office. Now, the final example I want to make today is related to the PSD2 reality. And in this
case, maybe for the audience, I'm sure not everybody is familiar with PSD2, just in case. PSD2 is a concept in Europe, but I think it's globally applicable, and it's basically about account aggregation. What you've seen so far is that you see different accounts that are directly with my bank, with this single bank. So we can actually now aggregate in an omni-channel fashion multiple products you have with a single bank. The next part of what Tim is going to show is how can we actually connect with third-party banks, right? And this is happening in the US, in Canada, this is happening in all parts of the world. It's happening in the UK, it's happening in South Africa. This is about account aggregation, where we actually can now integrate with accounts that we have with other banks and actually make them become part of this single mobile application.
Yeah. So I'll do a quick demo on that. So I'm going to tap on Add External Product. And again, my personal assistant is going to help me here. I'll slow down a little bit because, of course, there's a little bit of latency. In this case, I selected ING Bank. As a next step, I want to authorize. And in doing so, it basically redirects me to the ING banking application. What you find here is that I can authorize with Touch ID. And as a next step, I can select the account that I would like to give access to. And in this case, I'm giving access from ING towards the Backbase banking application. I'd like to give access to my credit card. I hit authorize. And we now get pushed back to my Backbase banking application. From there onwards, the next question is whether I would like to add this account to my account overview. Well, I think that's helpful because then I have a single overview of all of my products. And that basically wraps up the flow and says, thank you, Tim, you're all set up. And going back to my home screen, we now have access to indeed an aggregated overview of all of my current financial products. Now, what is interesting from this step onward is the fact that we have this aggregation in place. We have insight into all of the information from the customer, including the aggregated account from an external bank. So why not use this information through AI, through whatever type of mechanisms that you want to have in place, to basically have relevant offers and relevant advices. In this case, the credit card is actually in depth. So as a typical, let's say, advice that a real person would give you as well, there's a notification on the top. I'm hoping it shows up here.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So indeed, my ING credit card is overdue. And what you see here is, hey, there's a set of costs related to it. Would you like to settle the amount with the amount that you still have in your savings account? Well, seems very relevant. We pre-fill it with a payment widget that's already set up to satisfy this debt-free position. And we're now debt-free. Very simple example of how the aggregation bleeds into a personal advice, bleeds into action. Now, as a final step here, we've now cleaned up the credit card. Why not think about the fact, what is the job to be done here with the customer? In this case, maybe he or she is interested in a different type of credit card product. So why not position a specific product for this customer that takes into account everything we already know about this customer, whether he or she travels, and so forth and so forth. And in this case, we feel that the Backbase credit card is way more relevant for his customer.
So this is basically like a replacement campaign, right?
Yep.
You just got the data from ING, the credit card. You can compare kind of the interest rate. You see you've got a better offer for the customer. And as like a concierge or like a trusted advisor, you make the offer at the right moment in the right context.
Yeah, like a real personal assistant. So if I now hit get card, We've simplified this part, of course, for the demo today. But once I hit that, we provision an example credit card. And what you can see is that we have a full overview of all of our aggregated accounts, our cash flow, our incomes, and so forth and so forth. And this is what we envision as a very simple example for today of what is this engagement banking thing all about? How does AI bleed into it? And if you combine all of that, what's the real value or the job to be done for a typical customer?
Cool.
And these are just a few examples.
We've got 5 minutes left also QA. Let's go back to the final thing here. So I think what was really kind of important here is kind of to think about how can we actually make these mobile applications. So if we think today's topic is next level mobile banking. So one, of course, is let's go omni-channel into an omni-channel blueprint. Let's kind of go the job to be done, the design system, how to make those applications. And again, the third ingredient here is kind of, okay, how can we make them more intelligent? So they can, like we write down here in the blue, how can they really assist, engage, and act on behalf of the customer? So what you probably will see is that you will have access within kind of an omni-channel platform to multiple data sources: social data, CRM data, PFM data, personal finance management, third-party accounts, core banking system. Basically, there's a large variety of data. And I guess, how can we apply business rules? How can we apply AI? But also, how can we empower humans to utilize that data and get insights to actually make those dialogues meaningful to the end customer? I think we all remember the Windows paperclip. Some of the people in the audience probably will remember the paperclip. Someone genius in Microsoft thought, like, maybe we have this kind of personal assistant inside of it. It was the most hated feature of the whole operating system, and everybody on the call will still remember. So I think it's very difficult here that how do we make sure that it is non-intrusive and it is actually relevant and it is at the right time. So there's a wide variety of innovation space here ahead of us. I think there's a lot of excitement. I think the real thing is that how can we really utilize those technologies? How can we collect the right data? And then how can we interpret that data to be truly meaningful and not to become the annoying Windows paperclip. All right, there we go. So I think that's the summary for today. Let's go into the final wrap up. A little bit about Backbase. I think basically our vision is really how can we help banks to go from product push into customer first operating models. How can we help you to move from channel islands into omni-channel? And how can we help you to move from monolithic systems into an open modular architecture with a design system, with APIs, so you can innovate in a consistent way. What you see here on the screen is a very quick summary of the different layers of the Backbase technology. I would say for today, if you'd like to learn more about this, or you would like to understand how this could really work for your financial institution, just please feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us via backbase.com, fill in a little form, and we will reach out to you either tonight, today, or tomorrow. Let's go to the Q&A. Yeah, by the way, we have a few customers. We work with them, and we're very happy to do that and proud to do that. So there's definitely a lot of credibility. The Backbase platform is a proven platform. We've been in the market for a very long time, and we are trusted by over 100 different financial services organizations around the globe. Literally on every continent, banks are using Backbase to move into that digital future. Let's go into the Q&A. For the people here, we have roughly maybe 5 to 10 minutes left, depending a little bit on the question. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to use the Q&A question panel of your GoToMeeting console. And let's dig in, Tim, see if we have anything. I saw here something. Let me see. Yeah. What are your thoughts about an ATM? Do you think an ATM also can become part of the customer experience? And do you also see contactless technologies that the smartphone and the ATM can interact with each other?
Yep, absolutely. I think what we're seeing, let's say that the last 1-2 years in the market is that also ATMs become a bit more modern, meaning that they adopt typical technologies like browser technologies, even at some different types of vendors. ATMs are still relevant depending on where you are on the globe. So in the Netherlands, for instance, they're pretty much dead. But for instance, in the Middle East, we still see that it's a very important touch point with the customer. So it deserves attention in a way.
I guess maybe the summary here is also then ATMs will continue to be a relevant touch point. But is the ATM just there to give cash? Or do we go for a cashless society? And if you go cashless, then do you need the device that often? So in some markets, you really see a decline in actually the utilization of the ATM because people can do everything digital. If you also consider to use the ATM as a self-service kiosk, I think over time that self-service capability probably will move to the smartphone
for sure.
Anyhow. So overall, I think the ATM is a very important citizen in the channel strategy. And with a mobile with browser technologies, we can reuse and repurpose a lot of the stuff what we show today within the context of an ATM. Totally possible. Over time, depending on how, to your point, it really differs per country. Over time, the ATM might become a little bit less prominent in the channel mix. If we go cashless, right? And if we go into self-service kiosk capabilities that can all be done properly on a smartphone, why would you walk to an ATM?
Correct.
Okay, interesting. Let's see if there's any more questions. So thank you. Okay, first question that comes to mind is about the cost benefit. What would you look at in terms of cost to deploy the system? So it's a little bit of a question about the ROI. Is there anything you would like to share about this?
Yeah, I think the real ROI calculation is mostly about what will it cost you if you do not adopt a similar strategy? What would it cost you if you do keep, let's say, running the siloed game or put in a one-off mobile solution for the time being? What would it cost you if your organization does not become truly digital, stays with, let's say, the legacy approach? I think those are the ones that you want to put on the table and have a discussion about. Based on numbers.
Yeah, clear. What we also really see is kind of the distinction between build and buy, and especially in the buy process. The build process is that there's a lot of hidden cost involved in kind of creating those. What we see is really important. I think just an omni-channel platform for the sake of omni-channel is not a very good idea. So we've seen a lot of demand actually where people were asking, can we have pre-built accelerators? So for instance, the demos that you saw from Tim, we basically industrialize those capabilities. So they are already available out of the box. So call it a bank in a box for retail banking, for business banking, for wealth management, with the basic and advanced capabilities pre-built. You can customize it, you can tailor it, you can connect it to your own backend, you can connect it to your own core, you can connect it to your own CRM, you can optimize it with your own UX, you can stay within our UX design system, or you can modify it and extend it into your own local perspectives. That's all possible, but these accelerators, we believe, are very important. So just having an empty platform is not very useful because you still need to do a lot of work. Taking the platform together with those end-to-end accelerators probably will have a very attractive ROI because it will reduce a lot of labor and it will reduce a lot of custom application development. And you basically have all the kickstarters, all the accelerators in place, so you can really focus on the more advanced and the more valuable stuff for your end customers.
Perhaps as a question that bolts on to the previous one about ROI, the question is, how long would the journey take for a transformation process from traditional to digital? Perhaps there's some thoughts we can share there.
Yeah, this is a question from Michael. Well, Michael, I think there's a few elements here, but probably the biggest time-consuming factor is there management executive buy-in? Is there a proper process in place to really learn to become a digital player? To go into agile, to set a proper, realistic collaboration model between the business and the IT stakeholders. I think having that in place or not in place can really have a very big impact on your timelines. We've seen banks, both from medium size to large size, that are really, the way they are organized is making a factor 2 or 3 in kind of timelines. And what I'm trying to say is that from the moment the bank is committed to digital, and not only on paper and in a McKinsey study, but they're also committed in the operating model, and they go more into kind of an agile way of working where, for instance, the key business owners, the product owners, and the technologists are, for instance, working in the same room, on the same building. That kind of more Silicon Valley type of digital collaboration model, I think that is a huge accelerator of the rollout and a pragmatism. So I think that is probably the biggest driver on the time to do this. On average, I would say, and it really depends on how big, but typically a full omni-channel rollout, because most of these processes, there's a lot. You pick the ones that are most painful, or you pick the ones that have the biggest return on investment. You basically prioritize what items are having the biggest impact on your business, and you can, or they're easy to accomplish and they have a high return, you start with those. We've seen examples that within 6 months, 3 to 6 months, you can have real impact and you can go live with real stuff. And I think picking those winners are very important to get the internal momentum for the organizational model, the move to digital, the digital operating model, but also to really build that initial first success. And then from there, you can roll out. And that rollout probably will never stop, because you will continue to innovate and you will continue to take on new jobs to be done, and you treat them with a customer first perspective. I think that's kind of the high level picture. We have customers that started with Backbase 5 years ago, and they really operate totally omni-channel. Like 800 different customer interactions are fully automated all over, and they are universal for employees and customers. They are available on any device in Touchpoint. So within a 4-year program, we've seen very large banks and small banks doing this, and they're really on an omni-channel footprint, and they've done it. And the good news is they continue to innovate. Tim, how relevant is this for business banking? Another question.
Yeah, question from VJ, I believe. This is super relevant for business banking. Even better, it's super relevant for anything related to banking. Retail is usually the first, let's say, vertical that has to go and has to innovate because it's customer facing. But similarly, if you look at all of these patterns, if you look at the thought pattern behind moving towards truly omni-channel and having engagement banking interfaces and so forth, in business banking, similarly, over time, you want to service your business banking customer as well in such a simple manner. And then we go into wealth banking, same story. Then we go into institutional banking. I think you get the gist. So yes, also for business banking, extremely relevant. And that's also what you find in the whole omni-channel strategy, if you will. It might be the case that you start on retail banking. It might also well be the case that you start on business banking, because perhaps that's the vertical where your bank is generating most money, and perhaps that's the channel where you're, let's say, most far behind in terms of the offering that you have in the digital channels.
Good. There's a few more questions. We'll just do them quickly. There's, hey, we do have we already have a very strong mobile and internet brand, so we're pretty happy with that. Could we use the Backbase omnichannel technology under our own UX platform? This is a question from Thomas. Quick answer is, I do think so. Not across the board, but you can actually pick and choose. Everything in the Backbase platform is a la carte. So, for instance, we see customers that already have a great mobile app. They just made a huge investment there. They're not ready to replace that yet. So they pick elements out of the Backbase platform, for instance, to help them to streamline customer onboarding or to streamline origination for various products. Or they start to use it for employees to kind of start the omnichannel journey there. And then over time, the mobile and the internet brand will be combined. So, yes, it is totally possible, and the good news, it's just a la carte. It's plug and play, and we can be very flexible. Another one is here, and that is kind of, we already have a lot of different backend systems in place. Do we have to start all over?
Yeah, very good question. Simple answer is definitely not. And that's exactly why the architectural blueprints that we just were presenting to you, that's why they are looking as such, meaning we live on top of all of the existing systems. And that's also the architecture we would recommend, regardless of whether you work with Backbase, yes or no. You want to leverage those investments. You want to leverage the fact that that knowledge is already in there, plus the applications are already productive for the bank. And changing all of that out, or replacing all of that, that's never going to deliver the business value that you're looking for. So most definitely yes, and that's why you want to have such an architecture in place.
Final question, and there's way more, so apologies that we cannot handle everything, but we really also need to wrap it up for the audience. How robust is the integration services catering to high volumes user access? Do you have any performance benchmark? So basically, imagine we have huge loads. How's it gonna scale?
Yeah, good question, because obviously we're working in the banking space, and actually the bigger accounts that we have thousands of concurrent users, if not tens of thousands, in days. Yeah. And what you see there is that, again, comes to the architectural blueprint. So imagine that a platform like Backbase is fully microservice architecture, implying that we have scaling across the board in a way that is very flexible and very intelligent. Meaning it's following the patterns that you see in the market nowadays for proper modern digital banking environments that you will not have any performance issues with. So it really boils down to how do you architect this? How do you separate out the different layers? And how do you optimize therefore for the concurrency?
Yeah, I think this question is also related to the question from Santiago. I'm not sure if you're still there, Santiago, but this is also, what can Backbase do? Well, Backbase, the layers in the different a la carte layers, we provide basically everything you need. So there's a very powerful integration engine that can connect to any backend with multiple enterprise application integration patterns. So you can consider that done. We also have a data persistency layer. So if you need to have ultra fast Google-like search and your core systems are not able to provide that, there's a way to do that as well. So I think a large part of the Backbase platform will provide you with most of these common capabilities and patterns. It's all industrialized and optimized for high volume cases. One of our largest customers has 40 million internet and mobile banking customers, so the platform really can scale to those type of install bases, so that's totally fine. All the core components are there. The part that you still need to do, of course, is to create web services. So Backbase is not per se a middleware provider. We're not providing an ESB. And that's good. I think most of the banks already have a service bus in place, or they are already moving to an API gateway. So although Backbase could do this, it's typically required in the market that we utilize the existing service bus, the existing middleware, and the existing API gateway. And we basically sit on top of that and leverage the capabilities they provide. I think that's it for today. We're already 10 minutes over, so we're very grateful for all of you to be here. Hopefully you enjoyed it and it was useful. Thank you for some of the compliments we see here as well in the chat box. I think we have like over 30 questions here, and thank you. So that's really nice. Looking forward to meet you next time. One final thing, we are organizing Backbase Connect. Backbase Connect is our annual user conference. It will be in the end of November, 27 to 29. It will be in Amsterdam. So if you are interested, you can actually Google for this, Backbase Connect in Amsterdam. You can go to a dedicated website and it will provide you an overview. Many of the topics you saw today will be addressed at Backbase Connect, and we'll go in depth about how these things work with hands-on active workshops. And most importantly, we have around 18 different customers from all over the world presenting their lessons learned, their best practices. They are all part of this omni-channel customer journey. They are all part of this digital transformation process. And they're basically sharing with the audience about what works and what doesn't work. So if you happen to be in Amsterdam or you are really interested in this topic, we would like to let you know that you are more than welcome. And at the website connect.backbase.com, you can find more information and you can